Mance Harmon here with Leemon Baird, and welcome to the next episode of First Principles. So today we're going to talk about something that's been near and dear to our hearts for 3 decades. 3 decades.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence. And there's a long history here. I think it would be interesting just to relay how Leemon and I first met and the circumstances that led to our working together beginning in 1993. I was originally intended to be a missileer. The Air Force was, even though I had a degree in computer science, the Air Force was going to be sending me to be a missileer. A missileer is one of these guys that sits down in a missile silo and stands ready to push the button that launches the nukes, the nuclear ballistic missiles. And through a series of good fortunes, I was able to get that changed and then was sent to Wright Laboratory, at the time the largest Air Force lab with a $1 billion budget plus back in 1993 when $1 billion was a lot of money, and went to the the Artificial Intelligence Technology Office. I was there for 3 weeks, and the office was disbanded, which made me a free agent, made it possible for me to interview with the various projects there in existence in the lab, and I interviewed with Leemon. Leemon was working for the Air Force Chief Executive for Artificial Intelligence back then in 1993 on a small team, a team of 4 people doing basic research in machine learning. And I ended up being able to work with Leemon, and we worked together for only about 6 months in that role before he had to ship out to the next assignment. But we've been working together ever since. So we started working back in 1993 at Wright Laboratory in the military doing basic research in machine learning, specifically something called reinforcement learning, which we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk in some breadth about the state of AI and what's going on in the world today. And like I said, Leemon here, oh, by the way, I should say that, Leemon, your PhD is in computer science and in artificial intelligence. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, it's in machine learning. It's reinforcement learning. It's a lot of the stuff that we're now seeing changing the whole world. Neural networks, deep neural networks, reinforcement learning. That's what I was working on in the 90s. So that's what my degree was actually in.
Right, right. And so from there, from working with Leemon in the lab, I had the good fortune of then going and getting my master's in the same field, in reinforcement learning, machine learning, reinforcement learning category of machine learning, before going off and teaching at the Air Force Academy. So both of us have some background in artificial intelligence and machine learning specifically. So let's dive into it. So there was this time back in the early 90s when reinforcement learning, which we're going to talk about, was really hot. And it was the sort of the cool new thing in artificial intelligence at the time. And then a lot of years passed, 2 decades effectively passed, with not a lot of change in the state of the art, not just in reinforcement learning, but in AI generally. So there were these decades where we didn't make much progress. And now it seems as though in the past maybe 7 or 8 years, there have been a lot of improvements, fundamental improvements in the state of the art, and maybe some other things that have developed to the point where the old tech, the tech that's been around for a long time, is now more meaningful in some fundamental ways as well. Can you just talk about that? What are the recent developments that are interesting in AI?
Yeah, so what we've seen recently is computers able to beat the world's best Go player. And the computer doesn't even have to be told how to play Go. It's given the rules of the game, it just plays games against itself, and it becomes the world's best Go player. And that exact same program with no changes can play games against itself and become the world's best chess player, or beat all the Atari video games, or control a robot that picks up cloth and folds it. The same program can do all these different things. They eventually called it Alpha Zero because it just starts from zero. It starts
They being
Google.
Google.
Yep.
Right.
Who is a council member that we have.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. Reinforcement learning is where you take this really simple algorithm that you could write on a postcard of neural networks and then reinforcement learning, and you glue them together, and then you let it learn on its own how to be smart. So you're not making it smart, it's making itself smart. And that's exactly what you and I were doing in the 90s, which is just really cool to see.
Right. So there's this, just to expand on how reinforcement learning works a little bit.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about this beforehand, but there was this example, this analogy that I would use about learning to ride a bicycle. Can you, I mean, I'm sure that you can figure out how you would apply reinforcement learning to riding a bike. How can a computer learn to ride a bicycle?
Sure. So this is Q learning. This is invented in the 1980s, but it just changes everything. You tell the computer, just do trial and error, but don't fall down. Okay, that's not very specific.
Right.
It doesn't tell it a lot.
Right.
And so it starts to ride the bicycle and it does something and it falls down. Okay, then it does something else and it falls down. If all you tell it is don't fall down, and you just say every time you try something, well, don't do that again, then it's out of luck.
Yeah.
But then you say something else.
Because when it falls down, it experiences pain.
Sure. So we give it reinforcement. It's just a number, but it's pain or it's reward.
Right.
Okay, and we're saying avoid the pain, get the reward. Make this number as high as you can. That's what you tell it. If you're playing a game, the number is always 0 until the end of the game, and then it's 1 if you won the game, and it's -1 if you lost the game. You could do something like that.
Yeah.
So the first thing you do is you say, if you do something and it leads to disaster, don't do that. The second thing you learn, though, is that if you're in a state, the world looks like something, and you do something, the best thing you can, and it takes you to a state where bad things happened, a bad state, then you should start to think that this earlier state is a bad state. And then later, you'll be in an even earlier state and you'll do something, you'll come into that one. And you should start thinking that earlier one is a better state.
So if you're in this state and you turn the wheel right, and it leads you to a state that ultimately results in you, no matter what you do,
falling down. Then you will eventually learn that's a bad state. And now, anytime you do something that brings you into that state, you say, that was bad. You're kind of telling yourself it was bad. You haven't fallen yet.
Don't turn the wheel right.
Yeah, well, don't turn, whatever turn you do that brings you into that state that you know it makes you doomed.
Right.
You learn not to do that.
Right.
And so the key of Q learning was, I don't just learn whether states are good, I learn whether an action in a state is good or bad. And if I do the action in the state, it takes me to a state where everything I've ever done in that state has led to disaster, then this earlier one I think of as that action as being bad. And so information kind of flows backwards in time, over time, and you learn earlier and earlier states are bad, and pretty much eventually you learn which states are good and which ones are bad.
And the initial state is the state of you standing up or being upright, taking off riding a bicycle.
Sure. And so you can learn to stay upright longer and longer and longer, and eventually you learn the pattern of what to do. Or if you're playing chess or Go, you learn which moves to do that take you to the board positions that are better. So it isn't just learning what to do, it's learning how good each board position is. It's learning the emotions to have. Right.
Right, right. So that's reinforcement learning.
Yes.
Another way of thinking about it for engineers might be a form of optimal control.
Sure.
Right? And it's optimal control here being applied in some contexts to games, but there are a gazillion applications, including maybe robotics.
Mm-hmm.
And to make the point, you could use reinforcement learning to teach a robot how to walk.
Yes.
Or juggle, or...
Yes. And people have done this now. And robots learn really well in reinforcement learning. There's a million videos on YouTube. You can watch them learn over many trials. And they initially they're very stupid, and eventually they learn how to do things well. So this is something that we had in the 80s.
Right.
And then we had neural networks, which was learning how to actually, you had asked what's going on right now, though. Let's finish that. So we have things like Alpha Zero that's able to play any game and able to control robots and do amazing things.
Yeah.
Then we have generative AI. DALL-E 2 came along, and we were able to have a computer make pictures just by typing in words. It was mind-boggling. And then ChatGPT came along, and we were able to have computers have a conversation with you and generate a book or a poem or whatever. Mm-hmm. And now you have Gemini that's able to watch the video and understands what the objects are and have a conversation with you about those objects and make guesses, and it's just really impressive. So this is the stuff that we're seeing. You have Tesla, who had this car where they wrote 300,000 lines of code by hand to make the car work, and they are just now rolling out version 12 to everybody. End-to-end neural networks. It's just one big
but
model
that's
of the
different.
brain.
That's different.
That is different.
That's different. They started
Yep.
writing essentially policies.
300,000 lines of C code.
And they scrapped it.
And just now they're rolling out the one that scraps it.
Right.
Just now.
Right.
Version 12 is rolling out to the first 15,000 people.
Can we talk then just for a moment about the difference between sort of top level, top down AI versus bottom up machine learning? Let's make a distinction between the terms.
Okay, so you could talk about symbolic and sub-symbolic if you wanted to.
Okay.
Symbolic is you type in things like, if you have these symptoms, then you must have a cold. You can type in facts like that. It can do reasoning from it. The bottom up is you just start with a machine that doesn't know anything and uses maybe a neural network, which is a model of the brain, sort of, and it learns on its own from the training data.
Right. So expert systems, going way back.
That was symbolic.
It's symbolic.
And it's all symbols. You type in things
and
like
they call them expert systems because
it was supposed to do what a human expert does.
Yeah.
You know, the expert
you would take an expert and transfer the knowledge of an expert into these rules.
Yeah.
A rule system, perhaps.
Sure.
And machine learning or bottom up is fundamentally different.
Right. Well, so they did learning expert systems also. Yeah. So symbolic is something fundamentally different from sub-symbolic. Sub-symbolic is just a bunch of numbers floating around. We don't know what they mean. Symbolic is there's an actual word in the computer for cold and one for fever and one for whatever. And so all of the recent stuff was huge improvements in sub-symbolic processing. And now with LLMs, these large language models, they're using these neural networks to deal with words, which is interesting. It's sub-symbolic computing that learns, but it's manipulating symbols for us. Maybe the computer doesn't actually understand the symbols it's manipulating, but it's able to very powerfully manipulate these symbols and write words and things.
Okay, so then before we move more deeply into what is recent, what's new, let's set the foundations about with the technologies that have been there for decades, and then talk about what's been developed in recent years that enables things like generative AI.
Right. So the recent things are the things that we said. I was finishing with the Tesla being end-to-end neural networks. So you just have this AI system, this neural network that learns from videos of people driving cars, and you can also do simulated ones. And so the simulated ones are also learning.
Yeah.
Simulated environment. So the car can drive on simulated
streets. So
streets.
you build a model of an environment.
Sure. And then the car can drive on the simulated streets.
A digital model, a model that exists in the computer.
Yeah. But then you can also have video that it learns from. And now it's just purely a neural network. From the camera's information coming in to the commands going to the steering wheel and the accelerator and the brake is purely end-to-end neural networks, which means it's entirely learned. And if you want to put it in a totally different kind of car or put it into a walking robot like the Tesla bot, it should just be able to learn end-to-end just from watching videos. That's a powerful concept. You don't have to have humans write the 300,000 lines of C code.
Right.
You just write a very simple program and everything else is learning on its own. Very powerful concept. And so you have the supervised learning where you tell it what the right answer is, or you have the reinforcement learning where you just say, drive this car and don't crash. And you can do both kinds of learning there. So that's what we have now.
So just to tease things apart, there are the expert systems that don't do learning at all.
And there's expert systems that do learning.
Expert systems that do learning. And if you're doing learning, then you have supervised and unsupervised.
You have supervised learning, which is I tell you what the right answer is. You have reinforcement learning, which is I slap your hand when you do something bad, but other than that, you have to figure out on your own how to get to the right answer.
Right.
And then there's unsupervised, where it just kind of looks at the world and looks for patterns. That's less interesting.
Right. Okay.
So, and the problem, of course, with supervised learning is you need a lot of data. Yeah. That's the problem. And if anything we can use like reinforcement learning or learning from slightly different data and transferring is really helpful.
Okay.
So what was invented? Neural networks were invented. And you could say in 1986, backprop was invented. It's a really good algorithm, and neural networks go back before that. And you could say that it also...
What is a neural network?
It's a little model of the brain. It's not really a good model of the brain, but it's sort of a model of the brain.
Okay.
So you had that, and then you had reinforcement learning, and then you had the deep neural networks. So we called them convolutional neural networks because it's like the math operation of a convolution. But the idea is that your neural network has lots of layers, and that each layer is a bunch of these little neurons, and they look at a little piece of the previous layer. And then this neuron over here looks at a different piece, but they have to both do the same thing. And so you use the same thing everywhere. That's the idea. And you have many, many layers. That's why we call it deep neural networks. Okay, so we had all those things invented. That was in the 90s, and we could see this was going to change the world. Mm-hmm. You did need more powerful computers to get to AlphaGo someday, and AlphaZero. But you were able to do that. Okay. Then you have 2015, someone invents diffusion, which is the idea that led to DALL-E 2, the thing that creates these pictures. Really cool concept. And there were lots of false starts. Generative antagonistic networks are really cool, but diffusion is a different way of doing it. It works better, it looks like. And we have transformers, came out in 2017, which is a way that gives us our ChatGPT today. Mm-hmm. And it was a really cool idea. And we had other ideas, long short-term memory and other things that people did that were cool, but it just looks like these were incredibly powerful. And you never really know until you try it. People tried it.
So the fundamental advances recently are transformers, diffusion, and
the convolutional networks.
Convolutional networks have been around forever. Well,
no, since the 90s.
Well, 3 decades.
Yeah,
3 decades.
Yeah, 80s.
So longer.
Well, those are the 5 big things.
Yeah.
I would say those are the 5 big things that we're seeing the results of.
So
and
neural net,
networks,
reinforcement learning, convolutional networks.
Sure. And then we had diffusion and transformers.
All right.
Okay, so those are the big things that we've seen. What's the next big thing going to be? I don't know. People keep trying things. You just have to see what works. So we'll find out.
So why did it take 3 decades to get to ChatGPT?
Well, we did need better computers, so we had to have faster computers to run it on. But there's also there's no way to look at these algorithms and know they're going to work well. The only thing we could do is just try stuff and see what works. And people have been trying lots of stuff. And so you and I did work. I remember you wrote a checkers playing program that learned how to play chess. I thought that was so cool when you did that. Yeah. And it worked.
Yeah.
It used a neural network, and it learned how to play checkers, and it would get better by playing games against itself.
Right.
Very cool. Didn't even have to watch a human playing. It wasn't even supervised learning. It was pure reinforcement learning.
Checkers, playing, the computer playing itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we saw more recently wasn't a whole lot beyond that. It was just better computers and a few tweaks on the algorithms and using the deep neural networks, which we were talking about in the 90s.
Right.
So the only way that you really make progress is you just try lots of things and you see what works. And the machine learning field has been really good about saying, I'm not just going to follow something because we've always done it that way. We're going to try to find something good. Now we have this 2015 invention, this 2017 invention are really starting to change the world right now. And everybody's excited about where it's going to go. And we don't even know where it's going to go right now. And that's what's coming.
So how does it work? How does ChatGPT work?
So attention is all you need. In 2017, there was a paper published whose title was Attention is All You Need. And it was about transformers. And it's really stupid. All these ideas are really simple. But the idea is, if I just give you a sequence of words, I want you to predict what the next word will be.
Okay.
And you could do that by just sending all these into a neural network and train it to know what the next word will be. You could do that. And it could tell you maybe the probability distribution. The next word has this probability, or it could be this word with this probability, it could be this word with this probability.
Yep. So you have a series of words.
Sure.
Tell me
a string of words, a sequence of words.
Sequence of words.
Yep.
Tell me with the probability distribution, what the words are, which words are most likely to follow next.
Right. So what will the very next word be? Just that one word. What are all the possibilities and their probabilities?
Okay.
You could dump all that into a neural network. It might be okay. You could dump it into a convolutional neural network, a deep neural network. Might even be better. Maybe you would put it into a recurrent network or a long short-term memory. There's lots of different things you could try. But what they did is they said, you know what? When it looks at all these words, it needs to know which ones are the most important ones to pay attention to. And so it was a mechanism for doing that. And that was the advantage of this attention thing. And people had other ideas too, and they put all the ideas together and it worked well. And this one said, no, you know what? Just the attention by itself is enough. Just transformers is what you really need. That's it.
Figuring out which words are most important in predicting what the next word should be.
That's it. And that's it. And amazingly, that's all ChatGPT does. When you ask it a question, it just sees a list of words, and it says, if I were reading a document that started with those words, what would the next word be? Mm-hmm. Maybe the. And so it's starting to generate your answer. The answer now is going to start with the. but it doesn't know that it's answering a question. All it knows is that I'll bet when I see that sequence of words, what is the airspeed velocity of a coconut-laden swallow? It doesn't know it's starting to give you an answer. It just knows, whenever I see that list of words, I'll bet a the is a really common next word. I'm going to say the is most common.
So it has no context. It doesn't understand what a swallow is.
I think it is legit to say that. Or no, maybe not. Maybe you'd say, well, I can answer questions about swallows, so I guess it does understand what a swallow is. This is one of the debates right now, is trying to understand. Well, what does it understand? Well, I don't know. But this is what it does. And then once it has the, now it has a longer string of words, and it just tries to predict what's the next word, and just keeps doing that. That's it.
Okay, so what's a hallucination in this context?
Well, sometimes the strings of words says a swallow is a type of elephant. Okay, well, it was wrong. Well, it didn't know it was saying that a swallow was an elephant. It just thought the word the should be followed by swallow, followed by is and elephant. That's all. It doesn't know what it's doing. That's a hallucination when it's wrong. Yeah. How do you make it not hallucinate? I don't know. It doesn't know what it's doing. It's just kind of babbling.
Right.
Okay. But we may be able to get better things. And they have combined it with reinforcement learning, with humans in the loop, giving it feedback, and then you use reinforcement learning to make it better. It'd be better if you could do it on its own. That's kind of hard.
Okay. So, next question then would be, how far can this go?
Okay. I don't know. No one knows. It clearly can go... the big question everyone asks is AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. And the phrase AGI, the initialism AGI, means, I don't know, everybody has a different opinion on what it means. So some people mean it's when computers become truly intelligent, like a person. They are actually alive in some sense. Maybe that's what AGI means.
Mm-hmm.
Others
there
say,
used to be a test for that.
Well, that wasn't actually what the Turing test was. We could talk about what Turing meant by the Turing test, but you could say if you talk to it and you can't tell it's not a human, then it's alive. But that isn't what Turing said about the test. That it wasn't actually what he said. What he really said is, when you ask me, is it truly intelligent? I don't even know what that phrase means. But I will make a prediction. I'll bet 20 years from now you'll be able to talk to a computer and not know whether it's a person or not. That's different from saying that's the test for whether you're intelligent or not.
Which was more than 20 years ago.
Yeah, it was. And he said, I'll bet people will talk about computers thinking. Well, that's been true for a long time.
Yeah.
We just don't mean it. And now with the ChatGPT, some people think, well, maybe it really is thinking in some sense. I don't know what thinking is, but maybe it's doing it. Another definition of AGI is just you can do lots of different kinds of things. Okay, well then ChatGPT is AGI. It does lots of different kinds of things. Others are, well, maybe it can do everything as well as a person. Okay. We don't know if we're going to have that in the near future. Maybe, maybe not. That is an open question. I don't know. All the subsymbolic stuff that doesn't involve words, I think computers will be as good as a person. But anything that starts involving words and equations or, things that you could say out loud in language, I don't know if computers can do it or not. We will find out.
In other words, where there is optimal control involved, the computers should be equally good as a human.
No, if you're controlling people by giving them words and listening to their words and responding to them, I don't know if computers can do it. It's not control, it's whether language is involved or not. Subsymbolic stuff, non-language stuff, we know computers, I think, can be as good as people. They can be creative, they can have emotions, they can do all the things that people do. Because so can a dog.
Right.
So, the big difference between a dog and a person is the abstract thinking, which is shown linguistically. Really, language is the evidence of it. So if you want a computer to do everything a dog can do, I think it can do it. I think it can do everything a person can do that doesn't involve language. ChatGPT, transformers, and diffusion were really surprising. I didn't know a computer could make pictures that well and answer questions that well. Does that mean that it's going to be able to work as well as a human? I don't know. I've had conversations with ChatGPT, and it's clearly not anywhere close to a human. But can we fix that? Just a little bit more training, a little bit bigger computer? I don't know. Maybe. A little bit more reinforcement learning with humans in the loop? Or maybe not. Maybe we need one more breakthrough or more. Mm-hmm. We'll find out. It's exciting. We don't know where it's going to be heading. But I would caution people that we do not yet know that we've built the Terminator. This we do not know. We do not know. I know that ChatGPT is not really what I would call intelligent, and I don't know whether the transformers inside of it could someday become truly intelligent. Not clear. Plus, I don't know what truly intelligent means.
Okay.
So we have to add lots of stuff. We have to add internal state to it. It has to understand what it's saying in some sense. I don't know what understand means. And we need to learn with less data. Right now it takes too much data. It needs to be able to just constantly be learning. So what's going to come up soon?
Yeah. So what is highly likely to
Yes.
result from the latest inventions?
Okay. Clearly, things like ChatGPT and Dolly 2 and all their children are going to be useful for generating a first draft of creative work. And maybe a human then fixes it. Or even creative work that isn't important. Like it can compose music, and if you're using it in the background for elevator music, maybe it's fine. You don't mind that it's not all that good. So I think that we're going to see a lot of that. It'll write the first script for a movie. It'll write a first script of a novel. It could be used for evil, where you make lots of sock puppets online and do its social things. Who knows? I think we're going to see a lot of that. We are seeing, well, it will get embedded into Siri and Alexa and these other voice assistants. And maybe they will stop being so awful. They'll be slightly less awful. So in other words, I'm not describing Star Trek data on Star Trek, but I am describing the computer on the Enterprise, which is amazingly smart. And the series kind of implies data is sort of alive in some sense, but the Enterprise computer is not alive. But it's a really smart computer that understands what you're saying when you talk to it, and it'll do things when you tell it to. Siri may evolve to become as good as the Star Trek computer, but I don't know whether it can become data or not. That's the question. We don't know. I think we're also going to see a robot revolution. We should have a whole first principles on robots. But humanoid robots that can do what people do in factories and building houses and mining and all these other things, we are really close to this revolution, enabled by all the stuff we just talked about.
The stuff in particular that we're talked about is the reinforcement learning and the neural networks
Yes,
part of this.
the deep neural networks and the reinforcement learning.
Not the LLMs.
Not the LLMs.
Right.
You don't need that for that. So that's exciting. You don't need the diffusion either. That's really for pictures. But it is cool that things like Gemini are multimodal. That's really
So these technologies are complementary. I mean, robots.
They are.
Yeah.
Sure. And of course, when I have Siri being better, I'll put the Siri inside the robot. I'll be able to command the robot and talk to it. But it's not, the revolutionary thing is not that. The revolutionary thing is being able to have a factory entirely populated by robots. If it's building cars, it makes the cars cheaper. But you could also put them in a factory building the robots, which makes the robots cheaper. But now they're being built by cheaper robots, which makes the robots cheaper. But now their robots are cheaper, so they're being built by even more cheaper robots, and you get this cycle.
Yeah.
And so you get this wonderful cyclic thing where it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until it comes down to the cost of raw materials, which comes to the cost of mining. But we can have robots doing that. So the mining becomes cheaper, so the robots become even more cheaper. So now the mining becomes even more cheaper. A virtuous cycle there. Mm-hmm. Robots really are going to be a big deal in the very near future, starting with humanoids. Someday we'll have lots of dog-shaped and spider-shaped and so on. But right now, it's humanoids because they can get into human vehicles and use human hand tools and do everything humans do, fit through doors and everything.
So I'm going to throw you a curveball.
Okay.
Before we continue.
Okay.
About what's highly likely in the short term.
Yes.
What you just described sounds a lot like the fundamental building blocks of what's needed for going to Mars.
Hold that question. We'll do a first principles on Mars.
Okay.
And maybe we'll even release it before this one, but we will record it in the future.
All right.
All right. I like that.
So what's likely in the near term?
I think formal methods, having computers be able to do math proofs is a really big deal. We don't have time to talk through all why that's a really big deal, but it's a really big deal.
What is a formal method?
Having computers doing math proofs, and I think it's a really big deal.
But what does that mean? What's it mean for a layman?
Yeah, you want it to be you want to have a human who writes a math proof be able to have a computer fill in the steps you skipped. That sounds easy. It's incredibly hard. When we get to that point, though, it allows us to do things like have typical computer software mathematically proven to be correct, and we can start getting bugs out of software. Huge deal.
Right. So creating bug-free software,
Yes.
provably so.
Yeah. That's a really big deal.
Right.
And I think we'll see that. We don't yet have demonstrations of that being really good, but there's people working on it, and I'm optimistic that LLMs can do it because you can use reinforcement learning. We don't have very much data to train on, but once we have a little bit of training, it can teach itself by just trying a proof and then having the proof checking program tell it whether it's right or wrong, and that's the reinforcement. So I'm very optimistic that because of the reinforcement, even though we don't have much data, we'll be able to get it to work well, and that'll be a game changer. Will we have artificial general intelligence, AGI? I don't know what AGI means. I don't know if we'll have commander data being invented. I don't know that. Maybe, maybe not. Will we have artificial superintelligence where the computers are even smarter than people? Well, I don't know. Get AGI first, then you do ASI. But we have exciting stuff coming.
Okay, so that's a lot.
Yes.
packed into about 30 minutes here.
Yep.
So just to summarize, the hype that we're seeing right now,
Yes.
is it warranted?
Yes and no. The hype cycle always goes too high and everybody's excited. They think ChatGPT is smarter than it is. They think that we can progress just using what we know right now farther than we can. But they underestimate the true impact this is going to have on society.
So when we start coming down the other side of this hype cycle,
Then everyone will say, oh, it was all fake. But it's going to change the world in a really fundamental way.
that's it. Why will people say this was all a fake? What will lead to the trough of disillusionment?
Eventually they're going to realize, hey, ChatGPT isn't very smart and I can't make it smarter. And each generation eventually won't be much smarter. Now the current, 4 is much smarter than 3.5, and it really is improving
So we don't know how far. I mean, we're going to plateau at some point.
And we don't know where the plateau is.
We don't know where the plateau is.
And maybe it's really smart, but maybe it's not.
Right.
I don't know. And then if it does plateau, we have to wait for the next breakthrough to get really higher. But for a home robot that does everything you need, you don't need that. And we have the tools to build that. And it is coming really soon. Tesla Bot may be the leader. They may surpass Boston Dynamics in the fairly near future. It's exciting.
Right.
Very exciting.
Okay.
All right.
All right, cool. Well, that was fun for us. I hope that you enjoyed it. We'll be back with further conversations. I think we've touched on a couple of those in this conversation here. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks.